When Jonathan Edwards was 19, he wrote a series of resolutions, 70 of them. Years ago, I read them all. I was a little older than he. And I remember one lodged itself in my heart with a strong desire. God, I want to be that way. Number 6, resolved to live with all my might while I do live. My hope is that the years you've spent here at Bethlehem College and Seminary has kindled in you that fervent disposition of mind while you live, to live with all your might, all your life with all your might. There's a name for that in the Bible. It's called zeal, and that's what I want to take a few minutes to talk about. So I was sitting beside my wife several weeks ago reading Romans 12, and I read verse 8. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. The one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. And I turned to Noel and I said, what's the common denominator between contributing generously and leading zealously and showing mercy cheerfully? What's the basic point in saying, do what you do generously, do what you do zealously, do what you do cheerfully? And she said, you really want to do it. You're not being forced. You're not half-hearted. You're all in. And I thought, that's right. 6 verses earlier in chapter 12 of Romans, verse 2 says, be transformed by the renewal of your mind so that you can prove what is the will of God. And now I realize, in view of verse 8, that verse does not just mean that God wills for you to do certain things, but that you do them in a certain way. Once you have found God's will for what to do, now the question becomes, what is God's will for how to do God's will? And one answer is with zeal. With all your might while you live. All in, nothing half-hearted. If God's will is for you to contribute, you do it generously. You divert all the tributaries of grace and goodness and kindness in your heart into that one river, and you give generously, not begrudgingly. There's a way to do it. If God's will for you is to lead, you lead zealously. You corral all the energies and skills and creativity and desires and harness those horses and attach those horses to the wagon of your leadership, and you lead with zeal, not sluggishly, not carelessly. And if God's will for you is to show mercy, you do it cheerfully. You take all the kindling of the promises of God and you throw it on the fire of joy in your heart, and you do acts of mercy cheerfully. not reluctantly or under compulsion. So God's will is not simply that we do the right thing, but that we do the right thing in the right way. And in this text, the point is zealously, with zeal. Then, to confirm that we're on the right track, verse 9, the next verse says, let love be genuine, abhor what is evil. In other words, it's not enough to love. There's a way to love. Genuinely, all in, deeply, really, zealously love. And it's not enough just to hate evil. There's a way to hate evil. With abhorrence. All in on hatred of evil. So nothing half-hearted, nothing phony, no ho-hum attitudes towards loving people or hating evil. All in with hatred, all in with love. There's a way that this text wants you to live. Then, as if to make it crystal clear that we're on the right track, again, 2 verses later, verse 11, he says, do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. He intensifies the zeal of zeal. He defines the meaning of zeal, and he focuses on the object of zeal. So he intensifies the zeal of zeal. He says, do not be slothful in zeal. In other words, be zealous about being zealous. Don't be lackadaisical about not being lackadaisical. Don't be half-hearted about your repudiation of half-heartedness. He intensifies the zeal of zeal. Second, he defines zeal. Be fervent in spirit. And the Greek word for be fervent, zealous, means boil, just literally boil. In fact, in English, fervent is rooted in the Latin fervens, which means boil. So, Christian zeal is a flame ignited by God's Spirit in our spirit to live with all your might while you live. It is not a personality trait. Your personalities are all over the map. High-strung, phlegmatic. Nobody gets a pass on zeal. Got that? Nobody in this room gets a pass. It is a spiritual duty, not a personality trait, to be boiling in spirit. And third, he defines the object, or gives the object, namely, serve the Lord. Serve the Lord. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Zeal for zeal's sake is atheism. Energetic atheism. Paul is not interested in zeal for zeal's sake. He's interested in zeal for Jesus' sake. Serve the Lord. Unflagging zeal, serving the Lord. Boiling in spirit, serving the Lord. Gathering up all the streams of your heart. Gathering up all those energies and harnessing those horses, attaching it to the wagon of leadership. Taking all the kindling of the promises and throwing it on the joy of your heart and living with all your might while you live for the glory of Jesus Christ. Now, from those few biblical reflections on Romans 12, in a good Edwards fashion, I will now deduce the doctrine. All right? Doctrine. It is the will of God that graduates of Bethlehem College and Seminary do the will of God with zeal. Or that you live with all your might while you do live for the glory of Jesus Christ. Now, to clarify and support that doctrine, consider, 1, the example of zeal in Jesus Christ. His passion for the purity of his Father's house moved him to drive the money changers out and say, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. And his disciples remembered and wrote, zeal for your house has consumed me. Second, consider the reward of zeal in heaven. Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work heartily, zealously, as for the Lord, not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. Third, consider the camaraderie of zeal. Hebrews 10:24. Let us consider how to stir up one another for love and good works, not neglecting to meet together. And that word for stir up is the Greek word paroxysmos, from which we get paroxysm. It means rouse a person to activity, provoke, awake, kindling, bring alive. This is what friends are for. This is what the church is for. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, your zeal has stirred up most of them. Zeal is contagious. The camaraderie of zeal. Number 4, consider the loneliness of zeal. Matthew 24:12, Jesus said, because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. You may have to stand. You may have to burn alone. To be surrounded by lukewarm, indifferent people. God will help you. Number 5, consider the danger of zeal. Paul never ceased to think of himself as the chief of sinners, largely because before he was a Christian, his zeal was so great and so evil. Philippians 3:6, as to the law, I was a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church. And then he called that zeal refuse, garbage. And he warned the churches, there is a zeal that does not accord with knowledge. So measure your zeal by the biblical knowledge and biblical love. And finally, consider the price that Christ paid for your zeal. Titus 2:14, I think this is the most moving and the most important point. He gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. Christ died to make you zealous. Christ gave his life so that you would not just do the will of God, but that you would do it in a certain way with zeal. Therefore, graduates of Bethlehem College and Seminary, do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord, and say from your heart over the rest of your life, resolved to live with all my might while I do live. Father, by your Spirit now, would you come, set our hearts aflame, breathe on us breath of God, till we are wholly thine, until this earthly part of us glows, burns with thy fire divine.